Today's been a great day so far. I have not had to get any alcohol into my body. That means that I'm actually saving myself from my early demise by just a little. And I feel like I actually managed to get at least 4 hours of sleep, so that's great. I wonder what's happening today. Oh no. Well, howdy do there, ye there, yay, partner, yes? How's being poor doing for you today? What do you mean? What's going on? Can you not see? Oh wait, no, you can't see yet. The thing, the ranking, it's gone! It's all gone! Ooh, okay, yeah, it does seem like things are a little way worse than usual for you today. Well, you know what? Since you've been so kind as to help me out the last few times, I've got something just for you. What do you mean? What could you possibly do at this point that could cheer me up? I've got a game. Maybe you'll find it interesting, just like the last few games that I showed you, yeah? You know you like my games. Maybe you're right. Maybe there's something we could do on our own. Well, like to try and, you know, make up for all of this loss and all that. Yeah, sure. I'll give your game a try. It's probably shit as well, and I'll make a video about how shit it is. Right then, I'll just send it to you through my terminal. You should receive it on Steam soon enough. Not gonna give me a physical disc this time? Well, I mean, this time around it's a pretty modern game. You know, we've been talking about games from like 20 years ago, you boomer. I figured, why not? I get you something that released this year. Maybe that would be more up your alley, right? Modern games, new you, new me, new energy in your games, yeah. Sure, I guess I could give it a look. Alright, you enjoy that. Now, hopefully you get back to normal so that you can continue to slave away from me, yeah? Until next time though. Hello everyone. It is with great sadness that I have to bring this news to you all today, that in the year of our Lord, 2024, it would seem that they have decided to temporarily suspend the Kusoge Game of the Year award. Now, while it may be temporary, there is no date given for whether it would eventually resume in the future, and this is due to the fact I'm sorry, the sadness is just too great for me to bear. But this is due to the fact that they were unable to find any games in this modern day and age that were as bad of the games of old, that they have decided that it would be too difficult for them to find games that would fit on the list. And to some extent, I can see why this would be a thing. After all, as the years have passed, people have begun to understand better and better what works and what doesn't in a game, especially after being ridiculed for making bad games for almost 25 years. And therefore we would see that there will be a lot fewer bad games on the levels of the Kusoge Games of the Year of the past in Japan. But while that is the case, let's not let that get us too down, right? While it may no longer be a thing, what we can do is to carry it on in spirit on our own and look at some of the worst games that exist today and whether or not they would actually fit on this list like the games of old. You would expect that people would do a better job since they have access to all the materials that exist out there. And therefore, it wouldn't really make sense for us to compare a game that released in 2007 to a game that released this year to judge whether the game that released this year is bad. Rather, we should compare it to all of the other games that have released in the year and what the standards are in this day and age, and from there decide if this game is bad enough to be a modern Kusoge Game of the Year. In fact, many of you probably already know about this game to some extent just from looking at the title, due to the fact that the game got memed to I don't know what's wrong with me, but the game got memed horribly in the early half of the year for how bad it was. And yes, as you can already see from the title of the video, we are talking about Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash. Where is the game? Ah, that's right. We're talking about a modern game this time. Thanks to that, we actually don't have to buy a physical copy of the game. Instead, I actually bought a copy of Steam. So instead of holding a physical copy, I'm just gonna edit it into my hand with the power of technology. Though that said, I kinda do regret actually purchasing the game on Steam due to the fact that the game now, if I were to buy a physical copy for the PS5, it's actually almost half the original listing price. No, it's actually less than half the original listing price in Japan. So I could have gotten it for way cheaper if I just purchased it there instead. Though of course some of you might be thinking that like this dude here, he's just here to shit on this game like everyone else. He doesn't understand the game. He's just another dude who just wants to say, game bad. But what you don't know is that I actually gave this game a pretty fair shot. And what I mean by this is that I've actually played the game for more than 40 hours, which arguably is a lot more than what a regular sane person should be investing into this game. But what I did realize is that if you were to look at the number of percentage of the player base that actually reached the final chapter of the game and cleared it, it's about 16%, which means that there were quite a few people out there who actually did try their best to play it to the end. Some of them who might have enjoyed it as well. I'm not one of those who enjoyed it, but I did clear the game to that point as well, so you can count me in that 16% to some extent. Since we're actually doing a spiritual successor to the Kusoge Game of the Year award thing, I kind of figured that I would want to play the game from start to end to get a good feel of what the game overall is like, to make sure that we didn't miss anything in the end game out when talking about it, and then come to this decision on what the game, or like how bad it is. And even after doing all of that, I still have to say, well, I can see that there are some things that this game tried its best to do right, and there were some moments that were actually kind of enjoyable as well. Overall, this game kind of still super sucks, and we're gonna get deeper into why that is the case with this video. However, in the game's defense, and this might be the only time I'm gonna give the game a defense in all of this, because this is one of the few times where I feel like they were actually being treated way more harshly than they should have been. The whole allegation of the game hitting 100,000 refunds within the first 4 days, that whole thing seems to be very suspect. Now, I tried looking for data about this because when I heard the thing, my eyes actually grew to 10 times the size of Middle-earth, because I could not believe that the game would have done worse than both the day after and initially No Man's Sky back when it apparently resulted in the whole hoax because people were thinking it was a scam or something. And the thing is, I could find zero data about this except one guy on TikTok who apparently everybody credits with pointing out this entire thing, which I could not find any data to justify this. And so I went to look through all the data that I have at my disposal, since I also do analytics aside from game design at the game company I work in. And from the data that I've seen from the game sales data, which is a website which basically gets all of this data directly from publishers such as Bandai Namco themselves, the game hit about 188,000 units sold both across physical as well as digital platforms as far as the analytical site could gather, and out of this, about 81,000 were digital. And looking at the number of people that purchased the game within the rest of the first week, we see that the number comes up to about 222,000 in total, with online sales being about 90,000 thereabout, which makes this whole number of 100,000 refunds seem a little suspect, because looking at the achievements within the game, about 56% of people who played the game actually got as far as to get about 100 cooperative bonuses. This actually took me more than the 2 hours that Steam allows you to refund the game for, so unless Steam made a special exception for this game, which as far as I know it didn't, then the likelihood that people, like 50% of the entire Steam player base refunded the game is a little bit unlikely. And when you consider the fact that physical sales data, especially when it comes to refunds, is not something that is displayed anywhere, it does make this claim sound a little too extravagant that 50% plus of the people who purchased the game, out of which about 50% of people who refunded the game had to refund it physically, managed to successfully do it. It doesn't seem very likely. So in the game's defense, this might have been a hoax, to be honest. I mean, it's not the first time that TikTok has basically pushed something that is just insanely out of the way before. But before we get into talking about the game itself, we need to talk about the background of how it was developed, due to the fact that this is something that is usually, from what I see online at least, something that people don't really cover, and even when people do, there are many who seem to not have a complete understanding of how this game was actually made, and so there are some misconceptions out there. And it's important that we cover all of this so that we can all fully understand why this game is as much of a poo-poo as most people think it actually is. Contrary to popular belief, this game isn't just published by Bandai Namco and developed by Viking. If you believe that, you need to take that idea and throw it out of the window harder than Ray William Johnson throws black babies at the wall. Because the thing with this entire game, and if you're actually insane enough to play it all the way till the end of the credits, is that you'd notice that this game was actually produced by Bandai Namco. The one in charge of producing the title is someone called Kai Misaki from Bandai Namco. They also appeared in the Taiwan game show, I believe, where this game was initially announced live, and they were actually seen giving an interview there. And the thing you have to understand with the way that hierarchy works in game development in Japan is that the producer is typically the person who's at the very top of the game's development. Basically, the person who sets the overarching vision of the game and is also the one who has the final say on what goes into the game and what doesn't. In fact, for some of the titles which are more strongly top-down, you would notice that for some of those titles, the producer is actually the one who is actually making most of the decisions in the team. Some examples of this would be something like Puzzles and Dragons, where the person who's in charge of the project, Yamamoto Daisuke, the producer, has been in the position since the game initially was developed. And with something like Death Stranding, for example, Hideo Kojima is both the producer and the director, but you have multiple producers who come to a decision on what they want in the game, and then Hideo Kojima himself, being also the director, then deals with everything else together with the team. Within Japan at least, the director is typically the person who would talk with the producer and try to understand what ideas they want in the game, and then propose how these things could be done, and then works with the rest of the team trying to direct them to actually get everything done. So basically what this means is that Viking wasn't just completely in charge of the game's development. Everything that they produced had to in the end be at the direction to some extent of the producer within Bandai Namco who was in charge of producing the title. It would have likely been them who set some of the goals and also okayed many of the features that went into the final game. Plus, on top of that, there's also the fact that this game was not solely developed by Viking. Once again, if like me, you got lobotomized as a child, you probably would have realized after playing all the way to the credits that this game actually had a second company in charge of the production. A company called Gemdrops, which is also another Japanese game development contract company. And on top of that, you would also have realized that Viking actually only provided just a bunch of planners for this, which for those of you who don't know what a planner is, because it's a largely more Japanese game industry term, I think. It's basically the game designers, the people who do everything from like level design to economy design. Those people, they're all just generically called planners instead of being a specialist in one of this with a specialist title. This is due to the fact that the whole like generalist mentality that Japan has with this kind of stuff basically just plays a part in all of this. Look, there's a very long like story you could go into of why it's like this, but what is important is that for the sake of this video, you just need to know that a game designer is basically just a planner in the case of Viking here. And you'll also notice that most of the programmers for the project, if not all of them, are actually from Gemdrops instead, according to the credits. And Gemdrop actually did provide some of the game designers, although they call them designers instead of planners, unlike with Viking. But we'll leave that aside for now, who basically, according to the website for Gemdrops as well, help with the designing of certain features within the game as well. So, yeah, this might be a little confusing, but what this all means is that you kind of had three companies that were involved in the development, with key personnel being separated among all three of them, right? The people who were leading the project were from Bandai, the people who were planning most of the features were from Viking, and the people who programmed and helped with the design were also in Gemdrops. There are multiple reasons why this is worrying, the first of which is just the fact that when this kind of arrangement typically happens in the Japanese game industry, what happens is that like the very first company, Bandai in this case, probably is only in correspondence with Viking, and Viking is in correspondence with both companies, but Gemdrops is not then in correspondence with Bandai either. So basically everyone is playing a very complicated game of telephone using Viking as the saying public telephone makes it feel like a bit of a loot thing. I don't know if that's a me issue or what, but either way, all you need to know is that as a result, most of the communication that will be needed for the game's development would probably have been going through multiple companies who probably had spokespersons talking to each other rather than everybody actively communicating to each other at once. And the other reason why this is worrying is due to the fact that Japanese companies, they tend to be very formal when communicating with other companies. I mean, there is a reason why they actually have a whole different version of Keigo, which is like formal Japanese, that they use especially when talking with external parties as compared to talking with people within the company who are your superiors even. So to begin with, the companies will probably have held back quite a fair bit when communicating with each other because there is this level of standard of like politeness that you're expected to have towards other companies to not cause your company to lose face and potentially to lose future contracts with the party involved. Plus, as bizarre as this may sound, there are parts of the antitrust law in Japan that actually deal with preventing companies from abusing their dominant position over other companies, and that actually comes back and applies in situations such as this, when you have a big company like Bandai Namco, for example, dealing with much smaller game studios such as Biking. And some of the things that as a result are kind of protected are stuff such as preventing a company from requesting that a smaller company do too many retakes with the work that they have given to the bigger company, if that level of retakes would actually cause the company to actually potentially go bankrupt. And as a result, many of these bigger companies tend to be a little bit sensitive of that as well. I remember when I was in like Gang Ho as well, they kind of had this thing going where even with their own subsidiary overseas, they were kind of being like very reserved about it. They were like, yeah, you can't shit on them too much. You can't order them to do stuff. You can only suggest it and hope that they do it because of the fact that they didn't want all of this loss to potentially come back and bite them. So what you would see is that many companies that are involved in business transactions with each other, because of both this as well as the whole needing to show face and respect to the client or the other opposing company, they tend to be more reserved and they may not go all out and expressing their opinions when trying to get the product complete, which you would think that if you want to get a good product done, you would want to ensure that your point gets across in the best way possible. But you forget that we're talking about the land where sometimes you can just find dildos in vending machines and sometimes you can find used lingerie in gachapon machines. Not everything makes the most sense, and when they get a directive that may not make sense from the other company, they might either try to find a roundabout way to tell them without directly telling them that hey, shit is fucked, or they'll try to just like work around the problem instead and just leave it to fester within the product. But yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that this whole shitstorm of a game, it's not any one company's fault. Rather, it's a combination of miscommunication, quite likely, between all of these three companies, and probably some stuff just slipping through the cracks, or some people who had more competencies not being involved with the project within all of these different companies. And so it ended up being the case that over complacency perhaps in how easy this product would be to develop ended up causing it to be of the quality that it ended up being in the very end. That said, we've did the Jujutsu around My Kaisen enough. It's time to expand the domain of this video and talk about the... Okay. I can't. I can't. Yeah, let's talk about the game and how it was. So I'm not going to be complaining about the music or the sound effects of this game. Those are largely fine. I would say when I first fired up the game, the biggest and most jarring thing to me, if anything, was probably the main menu's UI instead, due to the fact that I don't want to, for the people who are actually fans of the series, look, I'm not shitting on the anime. I'm not saying that the anime that was displayed on the screen here was bad or something, but frankly, it does feel like the entire UI here looks like hot garbage. The UI's design feels very generic and boring if you take away the video. Like, if I were to block the video out loud and you just look at everything else, it's like, what the fuck am I looking at? This font on the page itself, it looks like something that was like a free asset on like Photoshop or on like Microsoft Word or something. Like, what the fuck? Do they not have anything better looking to use? And what's up with the whole like green jizz in the background, that like bluish looking smoke there? I mean, really, you compare this to the Naruto Ninja Storm games and it's like, holy shit, those were actually really entertaining the way they did the menu. Like, you had the text moving in and out, the character models moving in the background, like the actual ones that are designed for the game itself. The whole thing pops, the colors are great. Like, they actually, yeah, it's not the most functional menu, perhaps, but when it comes to the aesthetics, it's really great. So at least they actually did something with it that actually makes it look interesting, which for a fan of the game, I would feel like it would be a lot more hype to get something like that instead. Like, because of the way they design the menu, the game focuses on the individual things that you can select on the main menu one by one. starting off with what they feel would be the thing that the players who are interested in the IP will be most interested in. So you start off with like, bam, here's the thing where you can play as Naruto and relive the story. And then as you rotate through everything, they give you an explanation of what each menu feature does. And then you compare it to this, and I'm like, why are there 3 different online modes instantly available to the player? What's this customized in the bottom left? It's just like a single button. What is this shop? Are you trying to sell me a gacha? I know there's no gacha in this game, relax you. People who actually enjoy the game, I know there isn't one, but at the same time, there are many things on this menu that just aren't very well explained. And the way that the menu is designed is also not good looking enough to distract from the fact that everything is just like overloading the players with information right off the bat. But yeah, being the big brain person that I am, I actually did start with the story mode first. Although to be fair with the story mode as well, it's like just having the word story mode there is kind of confusing, since initially, because I didn't like look at all of the marketing, all the trailers and all that for the game, all the interviews prior to purchasing the game. So I didn't know whether to expect something like SAO, where they give you an alternate timeline thing where you play in the world itself, or you relive the stories of the character itself. I feel like that could have been explained just a little bit better, but that's just a nitpick at that point, I feel like. So we'll just leave that aside for now. I did start with the story mode. The thing that struck me first, the fact the game was fully voiced, pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. Like the fact that every single one of the cutscenes are all voiced, it's like, yeah, they did do at least the bare minimum of not making it just a complete just text crawl. So I'll give them a good plus for that. But the fact that the voices were actually softer than the BGM initially, it's a little bit questionable. I feel like that could have been balanced better. But yeah, what you're seeing is the flow of how most of the story in the game actually progresses. Yeah, it's cool you get the voice, but the fact that the entire game story is being told just through like crops of screen caps from the anime with just text on the side, and the text seems to be like not well aligned either, feels very off. Like I don't understand why when they have a game where they actually have 3D models for all the characters and all of that, they didn't just do the cutscenes with the 3D models instead, choosing to go with this more generic visual novel-ish style of showing the story. Like I feel like many of the scenes in the original anime, especially all of the more humorous or comedy-ish scenes where like you have like Gojo being all goofy with like Itadori and like all of that, it's like it doesn't work as well when you're just looking at a still frame of them going like instead of seeing the full movement instead. So all of that just does not have the same impact as the original scenes in the anime. And the background itself that they're using to like put the text on and to like occupy most of the screen where the cutscenes from the original anime are not on, it looks very bland as well. And the fact that the texts were like not well aligned either was a very strange decision. Like there are actually times where the text actually overlapped over the cutscene still frames on the anime instead, because the text was just simply so long that it just protruded out of the blue just area and just into the images, which was like, I don't know why they couldn't have just properly spaced that out if they were gonna make this the main form of storytelling. Because the way this is done, it does feel like this cutscenes, the way the story is being told, it's not really made for anyone. Really, like there isn't a target audience for it. If you're someone who likes the anime, this is gonna feel like shit. I looked at all of these cutscenes, and all that ran through my mind the entire time was like, yeah, I've already seen this before in the anime, and this is basically that but more boring. I could just watch the anime instead. And if you were someone who has never watched like Jujutsu Kaisen at all, the game's plot kinda does skip segments, and like most of these scenes just do not have the same impact as it would have had if you were watching the anime either. So you'd just be basically watching a action scene in a visual novel-esque style, and the game sometimes just summarizes entire plot points as well, so you're getting less plot than the people who watch the anime, and the way that the plot is being delivered as well, it just isn't as interesting to be going through. Like they would probably have a worse impression of Jujutsu Kaisen from like playing through this game's story if they didn't know about it beforehand. Like you would think that considering the fact that they actually have all of this 3D models, 3D world and everything, the most interesting thing they could have done is to basically do what every other anime character game does and basically display the entirety of the world that people have seen in the manga and anime in a more like 3D-ish fashion, or even if it's 2D, you give people more ability to explore the world itself, right? Because with an anime, with a manga, you only see these set pieces where they are meant to take place in, but with a game, you could even like expand out of that, give people the entirety of the world, or like even just the city to explore. Or did it? Well, it just so happens that they actually do have animated cutscenes. There are actually some. Yeah, I see you people who played the game all the way to the end. And I know you're raging at keyboards now, hitting it and going like, this guy, he didn't play the full game. He didn't see the thing that I saw. I saw it, okay. Relax. We're probably going to already have hit the comment below before even watching till this point. And I'm probably going to have to go down in the comments and tell you, like, no, bro, I actually saw those scenes. You need to watch like 5 seconds after, and then I'll just get a reply saying, oh, I haven't watched that point in the video yet. They actually did do those, but specifically for only the climax scenes for each point in the entire thing. So there were only about 3, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty cool that they actually had these scenes, right? Like, I actually saw those scenes and I was like, that's interesting. Why couldn't you do this for the entire game? It's not like they couldn't do it. They showed us that they had the ability to do it and that they basically did not care enough. Why? We paid like 8,000 yen for this game. Like this game is priced like a AAA game. You're telling me you don't have the ability to animate it like a AAA? You turned it into a visual novel? Games that typically cost around like the $20 to $30 range? What the fuck, man? Not cool. Then when it comes to the combat, which is arguably the most important part of a game like this, since as a game that's trying to appeal to fans of the series, the fans would really love it if you get to watch the characters you really like, do cool shit, and interact and banter with each other in ways that actually plays on their dynamic, while also letting you enjoy like all of the different things that you really wouldn't get from the anime itself when it comes to this kind of interactions. And when it comes to all of this point, this game, the way it does the combat segments, it does feel like a lot like hot garbage. I'm not even like trying to be a hyperbolic about this and being like, this game is super bad, and it really isn't. Like, if you've played any modern like arena fighter fighting game, this game will feel very clunky and very floaty. Like, you don't even have to be a fighting game professional or something. Just anyone who has played any of the others, you'll probably realize that with this game, the combat doesn't feel good. And there are multiple reasons for this, one of which is simply due to the fact that all attacks actually have a very significant delay in this game. If you've ever played a fighting game and wondered why the combat feels so smooth, it's due to the fact that most of the attacks either have an animation cancel, so you could actually get out of these single animations very quickly, or due to the fact that they actually weigh all the different weights of the attack with different types of delays. So like a light attack, you maybe have a less than 1 second delay, and if you use a very heavy, more high damage but telegraphed attack, at the end of the attack there may be a delay that is maybe a second plus, maybe even 2 seconds in some very rare cases. With this game, every single attack, if you miss it, there is a delay of maybe at least 2 seconds. Every attack feels like if you miss it, it's extremely heavy, and the time to recover basically leaves you sitting there with nothing to do until the character recovers, which basically means that after every attack that you're with, you basically are just going to end up sitting there for probably an extended period of time not being able to do anything, which kind of hurts the tempo of the game overall. Plus, because of how big the gap is, it's almost guaranteed that your opponent is going to be able to capitalize on that to punish your attacks as well. So every time that happens, you're just basically going to sit there for probably 10 seconds with nothing to do after your opponent follows up on it. And on top of that, it's also the fact that when you get knocked down at the end of a combo, which with this game, combos are already not very much of a thing. If you've ever watched fighting games and you see all those very cool and long combos, you can't really do that in this game. You have the square button, which basically inputs a full combo of about 5 hits, out of which not all the attacks deal damage. We'll get into that in a little bit. And you have 2 other combos, both of which are maybe 3 hits, but they also don't do damage. So the game is built around multiple different very short combos, all of which really don't do too much, and when you knock your opponent down at the end of the combo, it takes them about 2 to 3 seconds to get up as well. There is no button you can push when you're on the ground to like speedily get up. Sometimes you can trigger something like that while in mid-air, but even then it's pretty rare, because I don't even know if there's a specific way to trigger the instant get up either. Which basically also kills the tempo even more due to the fact that your combos are short. You barely are able to punish your enemies at times, and once they go down, you basically have to stand there and just stare at them while they stare at you for about 2 seconds due to the fact that neither of you can really do anything during the get up animation. And on top of that, there's also the fact that for the get up animation, it's very slow, And at the very end of it, there actually isn't an iframe. So if your opponent times the attacks very well, at the very end of your character's get up animation, before you can actually input anything, they could actually just continue their combo and then continue to combo you infinitely, because this game does not have a way for you to break a combo midway either. And when it comes to the gameplay systems regarding the battles as well, it's kind of unique in a way. I found it kind of interesting the way that they decided to go about it, but the execution arguably didn't go too well. And what I mean by this is that this game actually has two different types of attacks. The first type being attacks that build up the bar at the bottom of your screen, the extraction techniques, and you have the second type of techniques which are actually deal damage to the enemies. And the amount of damage these deal are based off the level below. So the game is basically designed around you using extraction techniques to build up the bar, and then using the other attack type to deal damage to them. The issue with this is that the extraction techniques actually do not do any damage to your opponent. So the battles basically involve doing no damage to your opponent to build up the bar first, and then using a different type of attack to deal damage. And the thing is that you only really have one combo type that actually deals that damage, and another button that actually instantly goes into the damage dealing skills instead. And two of your other combat inputs, basically they combo into things that do not do this damage at all. But what is important is that due to the fact that the game is built in such a way, you actually do have quite a fair bit of time where you actually just do not deal damage to each other. And even if you try to punish your opponent's attacks, unless you can punish them with that specific one combo you have that can deal damage, most of your other attacks actually just pretty much do nothing, especially when you're at the end game where the bar is already maxed out. Because the bar doesn't really fully deplete more often than not. It actually depletes the used amount, which basically recharges back to the max, but it doesn't deplete the bar itself. And what this also means is that the game eventually devolves into you using these same two combos over and over again, because these square attacks are basically a combo in themselves, in the sense that only the last hit or the last few hits of the square combo actually deal damage, and the first few actually are just extraction attacks. So you have to use either that or the right trigger. The triangle and circle, they don't actually deal damage for most of the characters at least, and therefore you just end up in a situation where you just don't want to use them. One kind of interesting thing they did though is that they made the game almost exclusively 2v2. For this, they kind of took a lot of inspiration from Bandai Namco's other game series, the Gundam Extreme Versus, in the sense that you kind of have stock and you have two different players. So as a person dies, they basically revive and you deplete stock. Although with Gundam, it was a little different since each unit had a different cost value, and so technically you could get one guy to die more and the other guy is basically like the carry or something. With this game, everybody is treated on the same value, and it's a almost exclusively 2v2 game. If I recall in the interview, they actually mentioned that this was because in the anime, more often than not, you actually see people fighting together in like teamwork-based situations. Very shonen-y, that's fine. I mean, it is a shonen thing after all. And so they wanted to replicate this by basically ensuring that all of the battles are not just like one character with assists that jump in. Rather, they wanted it to actually be multiple characters on the field fighting and supporting each other. So there are some features that kind of just got left out of the game. Like for one thing, you do not have local multiplayer, so you can't play split screen or have like a single fighting game arena where both of you share a camera angle. You can't do any of that. You can't bring in a homie and... I don't really have a homie to play such games with, but you can't bring them in this situation to play it together with them. The only way to play it is online, and even in the online, you can't have a simple like one character versus one character battle. Normally, I know there are people who found a workaround for that. We'll get into that a little later. But for the most part, you have to play a 1v1 where you have one person on each side and an extra bot. So your battles will basically be interfered with by the CPU, and depending on how the CPU acts, it might be the case that some people have it easier than others. So what some people did that I found quite interesting was the fact that they basically did a 2v1, because for some reason you can't do a 1v1, but a 2v1 online is something that the game actually allows. And so they basically got one guy to just be in there like a referee spectator to watch the battle, and they actually held tournaments doing this, which was pretty cool. Also, in spite of the fact that they have an online PvP ranking, which you can actually go and view like everyone else's ranking as well, they never really bothered to like just even put the most minimal effort into trying to ensure that people do not cheat. Because if you actually go to that ranking and you scroll down, you will notice that everybody is basically capped off. And for the most part, from what I've heard, it's basically most of these people are all cheaters that have just been there since the game was released. So we are like, what, 3 months a quarter of a year into it. They had 3 months to just even remove these people from the list, but they have never bothered with that, which like I feel like that level of laziness and inability to care is just very disappointing. If not for the fact that this is a character game and therefore people were probably more lenient on it because it's a game that is meant to focus more on the anime rather than on the competitive setting, I feel like people would have raged a lot more at it. But considering the fact that they actually hired someone who's like an esports manager, brand manager person to deal with this title, it does bring into question, like, what the fuck was this guy doing this team the entire time? Did they actually want the game to be an esports thing? Because if they did, why was he not doing his job of ensuring the bare minimum of people not cheating on the thing? Like, was he just snorting jujutsus up his Kaisen or something? Like, why was the game allowing this level of cheating to happen and not punishing any of the people who did it? Is it because the people paid $8,000? No, not dollars, but yen for the game, and therefore they didn't want to ban them and get them all pissed about the fact that their very big purchase just ended up being banned off of gaming multiplayer for ranking? Like, why? There was also like multiplayer co-op, which I guess that was actually fine. Like the multiplayer co-op, it had ranking. The ranking numbers looked realistic enough. I didn't have enough friends to be able to play till the very end of it to know for sure, but it does seem like the numbers are less suspicious than the PvP ones. I'm guessing that these are probably more legit, and with this mode, I guess in a way it's more entertaining due to the fact that you are basically just going up against bots, and the bots, they end up having like sometimes outnumbering you, which with this game being outnumbered can be pretty bad due to the fact that with how big the delays are after whiffing a combo, or like when you're already locked into a combo, how little damage you do at the start of it. If you were to attack one guy and before you get to the damage skills, another guy can just come in and like slap you once and instantly stagger you so that you get broken out of your combo and you can't really do damage. So having multiple people against one is actually pretty game breaking in this. So you and a friend working together to beat like enemies that are bigger in number than you, trying to evade their attacks and then lock in your attack damage. It's an interesting thing. I found it to be probably one of the modes in its online multiplayer that actually worked kind of well for what it was aiming to be. But it would seem that even when players host their own tournaments, they would sooner do it 1v1 than 2v2. So I'm guessing it might be a bigger issue of like the fan base is not as attuned to this style of multiplayer PvP perhaps, and so they would rather just play it solo, in which if that is the case, then it kinda does feel like they missed the mark on understanding the market they were trying to target with these systems. Like the last stage in the game, which was an extra battle, so like a bonus thing that's not tied to the story, it was actually really difficult due to the fact that you basically had to fight a 3v1, or rather a 1v3, you were the one, against 3 simultaneous AIs with a composition that is arguably quite solid, because when you start to hit one person, the other 2 can just hit you. And if you try to run away, because there's 3 of them and one of them has range attacks, you can only dash for so long before you run out of dash, and then all it takes is just one of the 3 of them catching up with you and you're screwed. Worse still is also the fact that because the camera forcibly locks onto someone, if one of them gets behind you or the others in front of you, you would then have to turn the camera manually, and that basically makes it hard for you to track both at the same time because you can't just angle the camera in a way to see both of them at any given time. It's something that I can imagine most people who initially played to that point would be really pissed and annoyed with, but you see, the thing is that we are a professional gamer, or a professional Kusoge gamer here on this channel. We are used to horrible as well as unfair battles, and so yeah, I'd win. Yeah, I know that it's not fitting very well. I actually got it one size too small, but I don't really have that much money to constantly buy like wigs that won't fit, so we're gonna have to go with this. Okay, so I know that Gojo doesn't actually appear in this battle, but that doesn't mean that we can't like channel his power to try and beat his students in this battle here, right? I don't know why the first thing I did was take off the wig. I'm guessing it's because it was too hot. But yeah, as you can see, we didn't clear it like an actual like normal person would. We ended up just like cheesing the whole thing. But we did do it in the end. We did show that we are the truer Juju sorcerer of them all. Speaking of combat, the game balance itself was a little iffy, but I'll give it a pass on this point due to the fact that this is, as I mentioned before, a character game, and with character games, even if the balance is off, if it fits with the original anime, I don't think people will really bat an eye due to the fact that, like, yeah, this means that they recreated him well. And since these games typically, they aren't meant to be taken in a competitive setting, then the fact that you can actually have characters who are really strong but embodies the spirit of the series, that's probably fine. The issue is just, once again, the fact that they have PvP rankings for this, and because of the fact that it does seem like they were trying to get people hyped up for the PvP in this game, what with the whole thing with the esports manager and all, the level of balance that will be required to make the game entertaining as a PvP, like fighting game sort of thing, the standards are much higher, and I feel like this game does not reach that point at least. In the free play mode, arguably the way that most people play the game the most, due to the fact that it allows them to basically put all of their different character combinations together, hear all of the different unique banters, see all the different like combination attacks the game would have if the characters can actually attack at the same time and stuff like this. Arguably the best part to put in all of the fan servers with all of the unique areas, all of the unique character dialogues. This mode as well, it's like, oh god, I'm gonna need a little bit of time. Let me put it this way, right? The character selection menu for this game, for the free play mode, is pretty much just an Excel table. It just looks like this. You know that meme of the Food Bro review of the week?
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
And that's basically what I was going through looking at this. Like, you can't even see the characters rotate in and out. When you swap the skins, you don't get to see the characters being there and the clothing instantly changing on them or something. No, you get none of that. You literally change it on the Excel table, push OK, go back, and then watch it change after you exit the table, meaning that you can't see shit until you're out of that table. Like, why did they have to do it like this? There have been so many games that have released over the past, like, when did the first, like, fucking Naruto Ninja Storm game release? The first Naruto Ninja Storm game that released in 2008. Okay, we have come 16 years from that. We live in a world where every single fighting game, even fighting games from back in the 90s, used to show your character model standing there on the screen while you were flipping through all the different character icons so that you can see what the guy looks like while you're picking a character. And when you select them, you have cool shit like them saying something like, "Oh yes, I am the strong man," or something like that, you know? Like, interesting dialogue and quotes while you're selecting them, or you're changing the skins, like cool poses and all of that. There's none of that here. Am I supposed to be playing a fucking text-based game from the 1980s? I mean, with how expensive this game is, it probably feels as inflated as most everything was back in the 1980s when the economic bubble burst in Japan, but like, holy shit. Could they not even put in that little bit of effort? Well, I mean, they kind of did. Like, the people who play the game, I know what you're gonna say, they did do it for some of the online modes, because I played the online co-op mode and they had this. They had a character selection thing. They had it there. Like, you could see the characters at the bottom, move the thing around, select characters, have the cool tags and all that. Why was this not used for the free battle? Why? They could have just used this here as well. It's not like you can't do it because there are multiple characters, right? Fucking Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has 3 characters going on at the same time, and they could do this as well. If I sound genuinely mad, it's because I kind of am. Like, this game is not worth its price at all. If you told me this game was worth like 2,000 yen, Like if that was the base cost that is sold at, maybe I could give it like a pass, because like it's a low budget title with like low expectations that you'll probably have for it, I guess. In spite of the fact that most indie titles are kind of doing more for cheaper. So like, why? Just so you know, this game, its actual like full size is only 9 gigabytes big. Right? You could play a free gacha game that is bigger in size than this game is. And you're basically getting a better experience in terms of like the gameplay and all than you would get from this. Hell, you could play Crusader Kings 3. That game is 3 gigabytes bigger than this, and it costs half the price of this. And I would very much recommend playing that game and causing mass genocide and that instead of playing this game. Well, that actually sounds pretty bad, huh? Okay, maybe you can just play as a Viking and like sail to Africa and become the African Viking or something. But like, yeah, you get my point, right? You can play a much bigger scale game, which yeah, graphically you may not think it's the best, but that has a lot more gameplay in it for half the price. And the whole point about the game size is actually relevant to what we're going to be talking about next, which is that graphically this game looks very mid. Like, the locations and all, I get they picked it from the anime, and some of them, they look fine. Like the one at the road with the tunnel, it looks kind of cool, but at the same time, it's like, this is quite a fairly generic site within Japan. Like most of these scenes in the anime, they take place in locations that aren't very cool themselves, but what carries the scenes are the characters and the fights that happen there, right? The fights happen in a location where you can basically focus on the fight more so than like what is going on around them, I guess. And it kind of fits in a way with like real life Japan, so it's fine. But at the same time, some of it, the way it's done within this game, it just makes it feel very uninspired, because they basically took scenes like random building A or the detention center where everything is like the colors are very drab and simple, and they just use those as the main arenas for this game and basically added more verticality to it, because like with sometimes with the animes you don't really know the scale of the buildings, and it's like they just show like shot after shot, so you don't get to see the full height or like the full expanse of the place. But with this, I guess they tried to replicate all of that, but because of that, the majority of the battles take place in locations that not only don't look like they have anything going on, but they physically do not, because they don't have anything like environmental traps or anything in the environment you could use to your advantage or anything. They tried to design it like an arena for a PvP, potentially esports game. And that took a lot of what would have been the soul of the location for many of this like character-based games out of the whole thing. You look at some of the older JoJo games as well, right? Like Eyes of Heaven, like with the whole like floor traps and all of that. You look like even at the fighting game, which is arguably a lot like less like, that's to be fair, like it wasn't the best, but even with that game, you kind of did have like location-based traps or action points that you could use. The same for something like Injustice as well. Like the fact of the matter is like, if you're trying to make a game where basically the locations are supposed to be something based off the anime, and you want people to feel like they are there and like all of the hype from the locations, all of that, just having a big generic looking building with like nothing going on within it does end up causing it to be very boring, because like you don't really need to use the entire full arena for most of these battles. Arguably you could just like cut it to a quarter of the size, because of the fact that there's no power ups, there's nothing at all. Even if you hide behind it, the game auto locks on to the location of where you are at any given time. Like you can't actually unlock the camera. It's always locked onto your opponent, so you always know where they are to some extent. So there's no use of the building to hide and ambush them either. The character models as well, they at times, like even at the character select screen, they just look kind of very blurry, and like there aren't many details to the models as well. Like I get the anime characters to begin with, unlike my ugly mug here, they have less facial features in general, right? They don't have the old man lines and stuff like the wrinkles on the forehead. And so they tend to have a simple and like smoother looking face where you don't really have as much to work with, but at the same time, they could have done more with the shadows to try and add in like depth to the face, like with the cheekbones and stuff like this. I mean, I saw this on Twitter a while back, like some fan person made character models that look way better than what was in the actual game. And he did this within like what, the span of like a few days or something? Like, could they not have bothered to add in even the least bit of like details to just, I mean, for a game that's supposed to be focusing on characters from a series, they don't do a good job of like recreating the scenes, the locations, and the characters. And I guess all of that kind of makes sense as to why this game is only like 9 gigabytes big. And even when it comes to the animations of the character movements, it does feel like there's a very big mix of like some of it looking really cool. Like the whole like ending scene with Gojo firing the beam, it's like, oh, that looked really good, I guess, for this game standards. And then you have stuff that all of it just feels really short and like cropped out. Like the whole thing where Togo and like Yuji would actually do the thing where he does the clap and they would do the combination attack thing. You could actually replicate that and do it in the game, but you don't get the same level of vibe from it because they basically shortened it to just 3 hits. Like punch, clap, punch, clap, punch, and then you're done. Like it has been shortened so much that it just feels underwhelming. Like for me, I think that was one of my favorite like scenes from the original like season 1, just seeing that teamwork combination battle between the two of them. Like it was so fun of a scene, and like that scene basically got shortened to like 3 seconds, and thus like it was very disappointing actually pulling it off when I actually first saw it. And if I wanted to be very nitpicky, the way that the tutorial was done as well, I really do not like how they merge both the action style tutorial where you have the what to do showing up on screen while you can run around and like pull off attacks and all of that, together with the whole like we're gonna pause the game and show you text and then you read like 15 paragraphs of like whatever the fuck and then we'll let you play the game. They mix both while still having what is shown on the pause screen within the action segments of the game. Like, why couldn't they just do a full action segment for this? Like, it kind of breaks the tempo when you have like pop-up windows coming in and out while during tutorial, especially for an action game of this level, especially when you already know that you can do it without pausing the game. If the game was doing the whole pause thing the whole time, yeah, sure, maybe I could look the other way, but the fact that they're mixing both kind of does ruin the tempo quite a fair bit. Also, I don't know why, but sometimes when the text box appears in the battle itself, where they have the character's portrait and the text there and they're saying something, sometimes the backing black bar to like make it easier to see the text, it just is delayed when it appears. Like, wow, what is going on there as well? The English translation as well is pretty iffy. Like, I don't know why they had to translate some of the scenes the way they did. I don't know if it's due to the fact that in the official translation it was translated that way and they were just copy-pasting the text, but like just take a look at this first line here. Am I supposed to look at this and actually be intimidated by it? Like if someone were actually scowling at me, looking all pissed and like saying this in a provocative, like aggressive manner, am I supposed to look at this and be like, huh, well don't just stand there, take your stance. Because the Japanese to English translation, it's not completely wrong. Because she over there tells him to like kamairo, which means to like get ready into a position to be ready to fight. So a stance is kind of correct, but the way that it is phrased in English makes it sound kind of broken. And it actually made me laugh instead when I saw the scene. Then you have the next line over here where right after that Maki goes like, where it basically means like, what are you misunderstanding? But she's saying it in a pissed manner. So you could probably translate it as like, the hell are you misunderstanding here? Or something like that if you really wanted to take a little bit of liberty with it. But that line just somehow turned into, okay, that's it. Like, it's like just the context of the scene like this kind of lost here as well. Then there's a scene where Geto and Gojo cross paths where in the Japanese version, in the actual voice lines, they both address each other by their first names because like in Japan that's something that is meant to show that these two are kind of close to each other. Like there is that level of them knowing each other that they're trying to emphasize here. But for some reason in the English translation, they decided to translate it such that for some reason Gojo is calling Geto by his surname and Geto is calling Gojo by his first name. Like the whole thing there is like, why even do that? Why not just have them call each other like by their original names? Did they expect that people would forget like what the other dude's name is just because they didn't call him by his surname because that is more common or something? I have no idea there. And then right after that, when Geto actually tells Gojo to like, you better not do that, or you better stop right there, something to that effect. For some reason, they just translated that to just him telling Gojo to be like, careful, Gojo. Like, what's that? What's going on there? Like, the line has kind of lost its entire meaning, it does feel like. It made the conversation feel a little more disjointed. Maybe you could blame it on my English skills not being perfect enough or something, but like, him saying like, you don't think we're actually gonna let you get away with that, did you? And he just responds by going like, careful Gojo. Like, I was like, it feels a little disjointed overall. And the entire translation is full of issues like this, which just kind of takes out of the whole experience, I feel like. Now granted, most people who play this game probably wouldn't be looking at both languages simultaneously, but I feel like because of the way they're translating it, if this does not match with the original works that were being translated, then it does create this level of disconnect for the viewers. And either way, I do feel like this doesn't do a very good job of trying to get across the original creator's words or what he wants the characters to be saying in this position when they're changing stuff up like this. And here's the thing, right? I get why this happened. I really wish I didn't understand why this happened, because at least then I could feel like maybe there was a decision that they made that was smart but just went the wrong way. But instead, it is very clear from the credits when it rolls by and you see that English services for the translation are provided for by Paul to Win, that things were just gonna go very south. This is gonna be something that makes a little less sense for people who don't work in the Japanese game industry, I feel like, but even among many of the companies I've worked for in the past, Paul to Win is pretty notorious for not doing the best job when it comes to both QA and localization, both of which are supposed to be, the main jobs of that company. It's to the extent that most people I know that have worked on any form of localization before, they tend to try to distance themselves from Paul to Win if they can. The only ones who are still working with Paul to Win, it feels like, are companies who already had a contract with them before and therefore feel like they're kind of obliged to continue working with them. And even then, many of the companies that I know that do work with Paul to Win actually have contracts with other companies to do the exact same work as Paul to Win to ensure that the work goes smoothly. That's how untrustworthy they are to some companies. So yeah, I don't know why Bandai Namco chose to go with a company this notorious, especially within the Japanese game industry, but yeah, it do be what it be, I suppose. One other thing as well, I feel like this game just had a lot of bloat behind it. I feel like perhaps this could have worked better if they had charged less for it, but looking at the number of names that were scrolling through in the credits, I feel like, especially on the side of Bandai, if we're gonna say that Bandai is not a developer on this game, then it really doesn't make sense that Bandai has almost quadruple, if not multitudes more times the number of developers than, if not multitudes of times more employees working on this project than the actual game's developers themselves. The fact that there were this many names tied to the game for people who weren't even working on the actual game itself really goes to show, in my opinion, how bloated the company has become at this point, with people who are supporting the running on the and the administration of the company who aren't actually directly contributing to what makes the company the most money. And it's maybe because of stuff like this that the game also ends up, unfortunately, charging more than what it should be because of all the back-end people they have to support. All because they are a listed firm that has to constantly grow and show growth. But yeah, as a result, I feel like this game is probably somewhere between Pro Golfer Saru as well as New Gear. Now, it is not the worst game we have played so far on this channel. It's not on the level of a scam that something like Ogo no Kizuna was. Now, this definitely feels like a scam. This game, on the other hand, I can get that the people who played it probably felt scammed, but at the same time, it's not on the level of hot garbage that this was. Right, it's probably somewhere closer to what Pro Golfer Saru was, where it was a game based on an anime which had its huge level of fans as well, but the game was very expensive, which this was also, I think, around AAA price for its time, while having minimal content and having a system that is confusing, and when you realize what it actually is, you kind of do feel scammed because it is not the experience that the players would have hoped for. That said, I feel like even then, it's not on the level of boring fan service lacking game that this was. At least, the Jujutsu Kaisen had a story. It made that slightly better than this. You had character interactions, characters did speak to each other and all of that. This, you kind of had the characters having some voice lines and being animated, and that's cool, but you don't even get the characters interacting with each other. So I would say it's still slightly better than this, but at the same time, it also kind of reminds me of No Gear in the sense that with No Gear, you kind of had a game where it was a game, and that feels kind of weird to say, but many of the games you've played, yeah, could question whether it's even considerable a game. So at least this could be considered a game. It's just that it didn't really do much that was good. Its balance was kind of broken, just like with this game. And in a sense, the level to which you had many things that were wrong with this game kind of reminded me of Nogia as well, in the sense that like it did nothing like stupendously bad. It's not a Ogo no Kizuna or a Sengoku Hime once again, but it does do almost everything bad to some degree, and that just makes the overall experience feel even worse, because there isn't really much you can say that they did that was really good as compared to games of its era, like in this year where you basically have Dragon Ball games that are being played, like something like Evo for example. But even then, at least it's still a more interesting experience than something like Nokia, right? You do have a 3D environment where you can run around and dodge around and punch people. It does have some of the good things about a fighting game, although I would say that it really just has some of the basics of a fighting or arena brawler game down. But it doesn't do as good a job as every single other arena brawler that has been released for a big title in the past few years. And in my opinion at least, even Eyes of Heaven, a JoJo game made in like almost 10 years ago at this point, is a more entertaining game because it does do the fan service things a lot more interestingly, and it does make the arenas that you fight in matter a little more, all while having its own unique plot, which while it wasn't the best, at least they found a way to string it such that you could have all their characters appear in the same universe at the same time and interact with each other in an interesting way. You know, something that would have been interesting if you could have like a time leap warp thing where you had Yuji as well as the main character for Jujutsu Kaisen 0 just side by side instead. Like I feel like that could have been interesting to see some banter between them as well. You know, like when they had the scene where Joseph and Caesar were paired together in Eyes of Heaven, and you actually had Caesar die before like Joseph, and you hear his blood curdling like scream. It's like it brought back feels that like I feel like this game just never managed to hit on that level. So my big issue with this is that as the standards of games should have increased over the years, as people have become more and more competent at making games, and therefore what is considered like subpar now is also on a higher bar, this game might actually be below those what we would consider a subpar game within the year 2024 at the very least. Like it does many things that make it feel like a cash grab game from 10 years ago, which maybe 10 years ago it would have just been a bad game, not considerable Kusoge, but I feel like if we wanted to argue it from where are we today, what are games like today, and therefore how is this, I feel like there is an argument to be made that it could potentially be a candidate for the Kusoge Game of the Year if the ranking was still being done. But yeah, that's all for me for today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I mean, we're not really looking at a game that was a Kusoge from the start. It's a game that many people probably would consider one, but I wanted to look at it from the lens of like, compared to other games that were considerable Kusoges, and even compared to other brawlers, whether or not this game would be considered that bad, or perhaps are people just like with the case of Pro Golf or Saru, where because of the level of content as compared to the price, people were just extremely pissed because it didn't match the expectations, and therefore there was a bigger like backlash than the one we've originally expected it to have had. And even after all of that, my opinion is that yeah, this game, it could have been a lot better. It is a shame that it ended up the way it did, and I really wish that the Jujutsu Kaisen fans had gotten a better game. But yeah, you know what? Since they're not actually gonna be doing a Kusoge Game of the Year ranking this year, if you guys have any games that you feel released in this year and that could be a good candidate for that, do feel free to let me know in the comments. Maybe we can do our own inaugural like ranking at the start of 2025 when all of the games for this year are out. Maybe that would be something interesting that we could do here as well. So do let me know. On the only condition is that if it's like little Timmy's first game, like if it's like some random single dude's first or second game, don't put those there. Like, to be fair to indie developers who may be starting out from something completely fresh, we don't want to like shit on them unless they really want us to. So unless you are the developer, don't put it there. We'll look at all of the games that are made by people who ought to know better and who are pricing their game at a level which implies that they should know better with the quality that they're delivering, right? So if you have any games you're interested in letting me know of, put it in the comments down below. Maybe I'll play some of them in the future and we'll do a bunch more videos, or even if I don't cover all of them, you can at least put them into the ranking and let people vote along the way. If you want to support the channel, there's stuff below. The video on the game industry in Japan, the part 2, will definitely come next month, since this month I really don't have that much time left to do it. Like, I'm actually recording this 1 week before, so even like speeding through all of this within the week because of the fact that stuff was kind of busy is already kind of, you know, so we'll do it at the end of next month and I'll definitely release it then, since I do have the script more or less done at this point. So kind of happy with that, and I hope that video will be interesting for you guys as well. But that said, thank you all for watching, and thank you to the following very cool people for helping to support the channel. You're all very awesome dudes and dudettes. But until next time, this has been me. Take care and bye-bye.